Big Ten football is just around the corner. It's only a few weeks away, and those few weeks with summer schedules, whether it is stressfully busy or enjoyably busy, they're going to go by in a blink of an eye. So we're going to talk about Big Ten football today, specifically 10 games that I think will be great games. I'm going to talk about the top 10 Big Ten games for this 2022 football season. We're going to go from number 10 to number 1. I'd figure we'd save the best for last. And along with each team, I'm going to be listing the handy-dandy position groups to give you all an idea of who could be favored depending on what matchups play the greatest role in each of these games, because college football is all about matchups. Yes, the games play themselves, and sometimes certain matchups that we expected to matter don't matter at all, but I think these position rankings are really great at giving some perspective into the matchups, along with the fact that I show home field advantage in these matchups, which is often going to be very critical in each of these games. So that's just a little preview of how this video is going to work. I'm going to spend about 2 to 3 minutes for each matchup. So without further ado, let's get right into it and talk about number 10, revenge. Oh, would it be so sweet for the Iowa Hawkeyes, who host the Michigan Wolverines, to avenge their 3-42 loss last season to Michigan in the Big Ten championship game. Iowa here, you have a great head coach in Kirk Ferentz, who is a demon at home against top 10 teams in Kinnick Stadium. Iowa has some struggles at QB. Spencer Petras and Alex Padilla have to be one of the worst QB duos in the Big Ten. At running back, there are questions with Tyler Goodson off to the NFL. Wide receiver, there are some questions as Charlie Jones entered the transfer portal. Tight end, you got Sam Laporta. The offensive line loses Tyler Linderbaum to the NFL, but they're set. At D-line, at linebacker, look to be pretty solid. And the famous Riley Moss in that secondary, along with great special teams as always with Kirk Ferentz. Iowa looks to be a defensive and special teams team. Michigan, meanwhile, looks to be more on the offensive side. I have Michigan ranked high in most categories, even on defense, but they do lose a lot on defense, and I think there will be some growing pains at least earlier in the season. Their special teams with Jake Moody at kicker are going to be fantastic. Their offense is also going to be fantastic with Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy at QB. You can't go wrong there. Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards at running back. Wide receiver, not the greatest in the Big Ten, but good enough to get the job done. At tight end, Eric All and Luke Schoonmaker will do well. An offensive line loses 2 starters, but brings Oluwatimi via the portal to the program. Michigan's offensive line looks to be once again a very great unit. Michigan is obviously, just position by position breaking down these teams, is favored, and for good reason. But Kinnick Stadium, snake pit for top 10 teams. They dismantled Ohio State in 2017. They broke Penn State physically and mentally last year in 2021. They beat Michigan in 2016, and they've competed with several other top 10 and better teams in their house. Iowa has. So this game has a lot of importance to it. Obviously, Michigan being a top 10 team, likely entering this game, looking to repeat their success of last year. And Iowa, if Iowa wins this game, what does this say about the Iowa Hawkeyes? Maybe they've improved off of last year. After all, they do return a lot of starters. So this game, it should be close, and it does carry a lot of weight to it. Up next at number 9, we do have Freedom. It's the name of the trophy between these two teams, which I did not know existed. I didn't even know this was a rivalry. But here we are. Wisconsin has had Nebraska's number in the past decade. Wisconsin, you got Paul Chryst at head coach. The epic Jim Leonard is DC. And that's where Wisconsin's strengths are mainly. You got Nick Herbig that leads a great linebacker core. At defensive back, they're bringing in some transfers after departures, some from UCLA. Special teams had their struggles last year, but I expect a bounce back there. and a defensive line. Jim Leonard is such a good DC that I expect Wisconsin, even with their lack of production there, like with Michigan, to more reload, even though they will have their struggles. Offense is the question for Wisconsin. Graham Mertz at quarterback is the worst Big Ten quarterback in my opinion, but you have Braylon Allen, Ches Malusi, a solid offensive line that features guys like five-star Logan Brown, who's been dealing with injuries, and others as well. Wide receiver, you have some questions too, and tight end you do as well with the loss of Jake Ferguson. Nebraska is an interesting team. We all know that I like them, and it's because of how good I think this team is. 16 incoming transfers, they're returning more production and talent than Wisconsin is, and their staff, even with questions regarding Scott Frost, their staff is phenomenal. Mark Whipple, Mickey Joseph, Donovan Raiola, and Eric Chenander's a very underrated DC. Nebraska, you have Casey Thompson at quarterback, Anthony Grant at running back, very good QB and running back rooms. Offensive line is not going to be near the level of Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio State, but it's going to be much better than last year, good enough to keep the offense going. Defense should be solid, I think, with Garrett Nelson, Nick Henrich, Luke Reimer. They might have one of the best linebacker rooms in the country, but you have questions at secondary, and even with the incoming transfer, Ochon Mathis, you do have some questions at D-line and the depth there. Wisconsin has had Nebraska's number, but with returning production, the use of the portal, the fact that Nebraska massively upgraded their staff, and the implications that this game carries, this is a must-win for Nebraska if they want to win the West, like I think they will, because Wisconsin, if nothing else changes but this game, which I do have Nebraska winning, like how I have Michigan beating Iowa, if Wisconsin wins, nothing else changes. A 9-3 Wisconsin will go over a 9-3 Nebraska in Indy due to tiebreakers. So a must-win for Nebraska here. It's in Memorial Stadium. I think that Nebraska will, which is weird because this hasn't happened for a while, I think Nebraska will actually outlast Wisconsin. So it won't be as close of a game as many of the other games in the top 10. It'll still be close for 3 quarters, though, I think. At number 8, you have the first test for both of these teams. Both of these teams, this is their first game. These are 2 teams that I do not have as the top 2 teams in their respective divisions. I have both of them actually finishing 3rd in their respective divisions. Penn State is a very tough schedule. Purdue is an easy schedule, but just they don't have enough of a defense, and some of their matchups on the road and with other teams with superior talent put them in that position. Penn State, on the road, last year beat Wisconsin. And now, with questions, Brent Pry left for Virginia Tech, James Franklin is finally getting some pressure. With Sean Clifford at QB, Kevon Lee at running back, an offensive line unit that still looks to be horrendous. Wide receiver room probably being the brightest spot on this team along with the secondary. Can Penn State come in to Jeff Brom's house? Can they go into Purdue and secure a solid win? This would be a big win for Penn State. It would help set the tone. And yes, last year they had a big win, collapsed later. But I think if Penn State loses this game or wins, it very well could and should determine how their season does go. And it's the same thing for Purdue. I have Purdue being a West Division contender with quarterback Aiden O'Connell, running back King Dure, at wide receiver, it looks like they're going to be picking up Charlie Jones. Everyone's reporting that. And they always have a guy, even with Milton Wright being unable to play, they always have a guy who comes in and just excels at wide receiver. Can that Purdue offense overpower this Penn State defense? They also returned both of their tight ends. And Penn State's defense is just clutch enough to where if their offense can continuously move, make Penn State uncomfortable, their defense can force some mistakes from a quarterback like Sean Clifford. I think Jeff Brom is the better coach in this matchup. This matchup doesn't carry the same weight that the previous 2 games do. This game probably, in my opinion, carries the least weight, but it's a very good game. I think this is going to be one of the more all-time classic light games out of this list, which is why it's up here. And both of these programs, this matchup could be something we look back on that was like the turning point. Honestly, Penn State wins this game, they could beat 9 or even 10 other teams on their, or 8 or 9 to get to 10 or 9 wins. They could win several other games if they beat Penn State. And if Penn State wins at Purdue, they could go from what I think is going to be around a 7-8 win team to a 9-10 win team. And James Franklin can be right back in it. So this game is going to be a good one. It'll probably be more of a shootout than a defensive battle, but it could also be that. At number 7, you have the bell. This is a rivalry. Minnesota and Penn State is. And what makes this game beautiful is that Tanner Morgan and Kirk Ciarrocca, as an OC and QB, were coaching against Penn State in the 2019 game. Kirk Ciarrocca then left for Penn State the year after. But Tanner Morgan at quarterback, there are some questions surrounding him, but with Muhammad Ibrahim and Trey Potts, that powerful offensive line, and Chris Autman-Bell at wide receiver, I think Minnesota's offense is underrated. They'll be one of the better offenses in the Big Ten. At defense, they do have some concerns, especially at defensive line, somewhat linebacker, but their secondary unit, Tyler Nubin, Jordan Howden, one of the better secondaries, if not the best secondary, in the Big Ten. And that matches up very well with Penn State, whose quarterback Sean Clifford was also playing in that 2019 matchup. A lot of familiar faces play in this matchup. The difference is it's a few years later, and it's at Beaver Stadium instead of at Minnesota. Sean Clifford at quarterback has similar questions to Tanner Morgan. I think they're pretty similar QBs, but Penn State has a worse running back room, as we just discussed, better wide receivers, far worse O-line. Defense is built pretty similarly in that I think the secondary is better than the front seven. At the end of the day, I see mismatches going Minnesota's way, with Minnesota's running game just being superior. And with Penn State's poor O-line, I don't trust their passing game either, especially against Minnesota's secondary. But here's the thing. This game, from what it looks like, from what I've read on Instagram, other websites like 24/7 Sports and such, it looks like this game might be the whiteout. Honestly, like I think it was just reported a few days ago that this is the time slot for the whiteout. And if that's the case, then this is a whole different matchup. Because the whiteout, it sometimes doesn't matter who's the superior team, as it was shown in 2016. The whiteout, it's never easy to win in the whiteout. Never. And that will give Penn State a whole different advantage that we can't even comprehend to a certain degree. I like Minnesota's staff better. I like Joe Rossi. I like Kirk Ciarrocca, Matt Simon, the QB coach. I love PJ Fleck as a head coach. Can't say the same about James Franklin and his staff or Manny Diaz. But this being a whiteout game, this does have implications for the Big Ten West champion, as I have Minnesota being the runner-up to Nebraska. If Minnesota wins this game, they're still in that race. If they lose, they might fall behind a team like Purdue. Wisconsin might be out of the Big Ten championship race before their last game or their last few games. Penn State wins this game, they could enter their matchup versus Ohio State with some momentum, which is the game after this game for the Nittany Lions. At number 6, we have what is quite literally going to be a shootout, and I don't see it being any different, because Purdue and Nebraska have far and away the best QB rooms in the Big Ten West. Aiden O'Connell, Casey Thompson, Logan Smothers, and the backup to Aiden O'Connell. I forget his name, but I think he was recruited as a 4-star out of high school, which is really good for Purdue. Both of their staffs are also some of the best in the Big Ten West. These are the more futuristic offensive teams in the West facing up, and I love it. Nebraska, as we've already discussed, deeper team than most would like to believe. They're bringing in a lot of transfers. They have a really solid staff. Running back, quarterback, linebacker, and even special teams, I think, with the additions of Timmy Bleekrode and Brian Buschini, are going to be their areas of strength. They have concerns at offensive line. They have some concerns at defense, like defensive backs and D-line and depth there. but they're going to be a solid team. And I have them actually as a top 10 team, which is very bold, but it's my belief. But again, top 10 team playing at Purdue, not always the best scenario you want to be looking at, especially against Jeff Brom and Brian Brom, his brother and offensive coordinator, who's coaching second best Big Ten quarterback Aiden O'Connell, and an offense that just always finds wide receivers, tight ends to utilize. And they're not afraid to experiment in game, like you saw against a team like Michigan State, where they had that screen pass for a TD that was beautiful. Purdue and Nebraska both being teams that like explosiveness and like to pass the ball on offense, especially with Nebraska now adding Mark Whipple. I think that this game carries more implications than previous games we've discussed, because Purdue being third in the Big Ten West, Nebraska being first in my predictions, if Purdue wins this puts them in the driver's seat, essentially. I mean, they would have lost to Minnesota, so maybe that's a different story. But this game could very well determine who goes to Indy, and seeing that these are more innovative teams, that their defenses have question marks, their offenses received the biggest upgrades, or at least their offenses are more around their identity is on the offense than defense. I think this is going to be a shootout, a close shootout. Depth favors Nebraska, coaching in Purdue's history favors Purdue. This will certainly be a great game, and if Purdue can win this game, then maybe Purdue will go to Indy and get their first, well, they'll play for their first Big Ten championship game since the Joe Tiller era, which was more than a decade ago. We have toughness. Number 5, Minnesota at Michigan State. This is Michigan State's first appearance on the list, and they make another appearance, and you probably already know what that game is. But Mel Tucker and Michigan State are doing a lot right. I think that their problems revolve around the offensive line and secondary. But outside of that, you look at their position rankings, what they're doing, and they already have solid depth, especially at wide receiver and linebacker. I think their linebacker core is one of the better cores in the Big Ten and nationally. Their front seven, their D-line's rated a B, but their defensive tackles are one of the best groups in the nation, and they have the linebacker pass rush presence to compensate for some issues and depth problems at defensive end. Tight end, wide receiver, running back are all solid, and Peyton Thorne, I think, is a good enough QB that with the wide receivers he has, that passing game can do some damage. And Michigan State's staff is also a pretty solid group. I think that Minnesota has the slightly better staff, but Minnesota going on the road into Spartan Stadium, where Michigan State didn't lose at all last year, it's a tough ask, especially when Minnesota has what I think is an inferior quarterback in Tanner Morgan, and Minnesota's greatest strength, their run game, is paired up against one of the Big Ten's better front sevens, and Michigan State's defense in general is just better at stopping the run. Michigan State's secondary, I would actually argue, is better at stopping the run than stopping the pass. And Minnesota's greatest strength is the run. Their pass game is questionable. If Minnesota wants to go into Spartan Stadium and get a huge win, and if Minnesota wins at Michigan State, they might have the most momentum out of any Big Ten West team besides maybe Nebraska if they beat Oklahoma. It would have to be that Minnesota would have to pass effectively against Michigan State. That's what would it have to be. Minnesota's defense matches up well against Michigan State's offense because I think Michigan State's going to be more of a pass team with Kenneth Walker leaving and some questions at offensive line, and Michigan State returning Peyton Thorne, Jaden Reed, Malik Carr, and a great wide receiver and tight end group. This game just embodies toughness because PJ Fleck and Mel Tucker are the most culture guy coaches in the Big Ten. They're both really good coaches. They like to run the football, be physical. This game is going to be, I think, more of a defensive matchup. There will be big plays, but it's going to be a dogfight. This is probably outside of the number one game, probably going to be the most intense game of them all just by performance on the field, I think. Up next, we have number 4, 1997, Nebraska at Michigan. This game I would have as a top 10 matchup. I have both these teams ranked in the top 10. Michigan, very deep team, the second deepest in the Big Ten. Michigan outranks Nebraska in most areas, outside of linebacker core. But Nebraska played Michigan pretty close last year. Too close for comfort. And with Casey Thompson at quarterback, Anthony Grant at running back, some upgrades at wide receiver, and bigger upgrades at offensive line, Nebraska might actually be able to make some plays, or make enough plays, be more mentally tough, have less turnovers forced. They could catch Michigan by surprise. This game is no joke. Michigan can't take the Huskers lightly here, especially with Nebraska's upgraded pass rush with Ochon Mathis, Garrett Nelson, and Nebraska's great pass defense with guys like Luke Reimer, Nick Henrich, cornerbacks Tommy Hill, and Quinton Newsome. Michigan can't take this team lightly. That being said, Michigan with superior offensive line play, guys like Ryan Hayes, Victor Oluwatimi, and explosive playmakers on offense at skill positions, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, guys like, let's just say, Andrell Anthony, more likely than not Cornelius Johnson. Michigan has enough playmakers on offense as well, and more depth all around to where Michigan should outlast the Huskers. But I think this game will be a close game. And this game does have several implications because of how good these teams are, in my opinion. I have this being an undefeated matchup, and it's probably in the real world more likely than not that this won't be. I'm just going all in on Nebraska because I like what I see, and Michigan's schedule leading up to this game is far from the most challenging in the world. But if this is the matchup that I think it is going to be, if Nebraska wins this game, then I will actually lose my mind, because even though I don't see it happening to the greatest degree, if they win, then they're immediately an even better team than I think they are, and I think they're a pretty darn good team. Michigan wins this game, they're likely going into that game versus Ohio State 11-0, and to the point where they could complete an undefeated 12-0 season for the first time since their national title 1997 team. So this game, huge implications. It's going to be close because it was last year. Nebraska made some huge upgrades, but Michigan now, thankfully, I say that as a Michigan fan, has the home field advantage, made some upgrades on offense, took a step back on defense. I am very excited for this game. Nebraska fans, however, are going to be more excited for this game. The $5 bits of broken chair, I think, is the trophy for this rivalry. Minnesota at Nebraska. And I'm going to say this first and foremost. At the beginning of this video, we started off these matchups by previewing the teams, and that's because there weren't as many implications here. There wasn't as much to talk about. But now that we've talked about most of these teams, we now get to talk about the bigger implications at play. The bigger implications at play is that I think this game determines who represents the West in Indy. And it's going to be a close one. Minnesota has the much superior running attack and offensive line. Minnesota is going to run it, or at least they should, because Nebraska's going to be much stronger in pass defense. Nebraska's linebacker core is actually much better at defending the pass than defending the run. Statistically, I think Luke Reimer, watch this in a Nebraska video, is one of the best linebackers in defending the pass and one of the worst at defending the run, which is quite the difference. You wouldn't necessarily expect that. And Nebraska, in saying that, they have the home field advantage. If they're as good as I think they're going to be, that stadium is going to be intense. It's going to be loud. The staffs for these two teams are pretty equal. Nebraska's is going to be more of the pass offense, better QB, better wide receiver, better tight end group, but Minnesota's going to be more of that running team, more of the old school style Big Ten versus what would be sort of, I guess, what Purdue has been known to do in the Big Ten in Nebraska. It's going to be very interesting, this game will be for sure. Minnesota, Nebraska, this matchup I think will take place between Minnesota with one loss Nebraska with none. So this is going to be an intense game. This determines who wins the West, in my opinion. Will be obviously a ranked matchup, probably a top 15, top 20 matchup. Huskers will probably be favored here slightly, but it will be a close game. Expect Minnesota to run it for a lot of yards. Nebraska, they're going to have to face Minnesota's secondary, but that home field advantage, superior special teams, and also a very good run game as well from the Huskers. Casey Thompson can run it. Anthony Grant is explosive. And don't forget Ramir Johnson and some of the other Nebraska running backs. They have a pretty solid and deep running back room. I expect nonetheless from this game to be a great game. A game where you don't know who's going to win until the fourth quarter. And that fits a Big Ten West game that determines who goes to Indy. It's not going to be as good as this game, though. Number 2, Paul's Axe. Mel Tucker's 2-0 versus Jim Harbaugh. And now he, for the first time, is going to have to play in a full sellout, assuming another pandemic doesn't happen, big house. And it's going to be crazy. This is going to be Michigan's Super Bowl, since Ohio State is going to be an away game. Michigan's Super Bowl is probably going to be this game. And Michigan, again, we've talked about Michigan and Michigan State a lot because I've previewed the teams and previous matchups in this video. Michigan on paper looks to be superior in every way except at wide receiver and linebacker. And it's well deserved. They have more talent. They have more depth. If you take the head coaches out of the equation, because some, and rightfully so, debate that one's better than the other, I think Michigan's staff, safe to say, is probably the better staff, excluding head coach. But Michigan State's had Michigan's number, and you can't ignore that. People ignore it all the time. I myself have ignored it. But Michigan State, and it's to their credit, this is not an excuse, they play different. When they see that block M, when they see the winged helmet, their eyes turn red with fury. It's like a bull seeing red. And Michigan has to become prepared for that. Michigan State is going to run trick plays because they don't want to deal with that crowd noise all the time. They're going to want to strike quickly. Not take a quarter to start up their offense like they did last year, because I don't know if they can afford that in a game like this. But Michigan State can target a Michigan secondary who, even though good, I think Jaden Reed and that wide receiver core have a slight advantage over that Michigan secondary. Michigan State's going to want to pass the ball here. They're going to want to run too, but with that offensive line and Kenneth Walker leaving, Michigan State's going to want to pass that ball, and their defense is probably going to play a similar bend but don't break kind of scheme as Michigan likes to run it, likes to go for it on fourth down, and is totally fine kicking field goals. This game, outside of the next one, which I'm assuming all of you know what it is, but you don't care because you want to hear it because it's so good to hear about the game. I just blew it and gave it away. This game is going to be a classic. I think Michigan is going to be favored here, and I think that Michigan will probably win this game. I haven't given a prediction for most of these, and saying probably X team will win isn't exactly a prediction. But even though I think one team is probably going to win, Michigan might even win by more than a TD. It might be double digits. Maybe it won't be. Michigan State's totally in the ballpark to win. Michigan State has a much better shot than Michigan will. And I'm saying that, well, not, excuse that for just a minute. Michigan State has a better shot than people are giving them credit for. And I'm saying this as I think Michigan State's going to enter this game with a few losses. Michigan's going to probably enter this game undefeated. And last but certainly not least, we have the game at number 1. And how couldn't it be number 1? You look at the position-by-position rankings, and this is the first time Ohio State's appeared in here, but there's a reason why. Because Ohio State's so good that no game on their schedule, except for this one, warrants a game that is going to be close. And therefore it can't be a great game. At Michigan State, at Penn State, Ohio State's next toughest games are likely going to be double-digit wins, especially since Penn State is probably not going to host them as the whiteout, as I read in a post a few days ago. So this is going to be the game. Ohio State, they're better in a lot of positions. Don't get me wrong, quarterback, wide receiver. Their staff as a whole, because I think Ryan Day's a slightly better head coach than Jim Harbaugh is, they have a staff edge. They have a home field advantage edge. They have a defensive line and defensive back edge. Michigan's advantage here is their win over last year, breaking the mental lock and perhaps inflicting sort of a mental edge that they now have over Ohio State. And we don't know if that's the case. We won't know until the game happens if Michigan has possibly taken a mental edge or not. But that's going to be an interesting look. Michigan is going to be more of a team of tight ends, special teams, offensive line, running up the middle, and probably succeeding at doing so now that they have a much better O-line and running back room than they have in years past with Blake Corum, Alu Oluwatimi, Ryan Hayes, and others. Ohio State's going to be the team that with C.J. Stroud, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, they're all about passing the ball. Passing the ball and Larry Johnson's pass rush boys. JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Zach Harrison. That's what Ohio State's all about. Ohio State's more about those big plays, the plays that get on TV. Michigan's just about slowly chipping away and controlling the game. And both of these methods have resulted in both of these teams beating each other in dominating fashion over the past. Michigan's way worked in dominating Ohio State last year. Ohio State's way worked in dominating Michigan in 2019 and 2018, and probably 2020 if the game wasn't canceled, which I was very sad about, even though I thought that my team was going to lose. But this game is going to be the game of the year for, I don't think just the Big Ten, but probably for nationally too. I have both of these teams ranked in the top 4. The winner of this game goes to the Big Ten championship game, wins their division outright, probably wins their conference outright, and therefore probably clinches a spot in the college football playoff. And with the resume that both of these teams would have, I have both of these teams going undefeated, even if they do lose in Indy. With the resumes they had in the regular season and that 12-0 record that I think both are capable of achieving, they might clinch the college football playoff berth before even playing in the Big Ten championship game. So this is going to be the game to watch. I think this game's going to come down to the final drive. This game will be more of an offensive game, as even though Jim Knowles and Jesse Minner, I think, will lead good defenses, the offenses of both of these teams are going to be their identity. Michigan being a run team, Ohio State being a pass team. And those are my top 10 Big Ten games for the 2022 season. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and leave a comment down below discussing your most anticipated Big Ten matchup for the 2022 season. I want to hear it, and I will reply to your comment with my thoughts. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.